My house is on the outskirts of the town. It is old, with cracked walls, with creaky windows that at night seem to me like eyes watching my sleep. No one comes here unnecessarily, and even the postman always throws the newspaper onto the porch, as if he is afraid that I will come out and say even a word to him. I am used to this silence, but something rots in it. Something aches and grinds me from the inside. I used to wake up in the morning to the ringing of telephones, to the hum of cars, to the voices of employees waiting for my decision. My word was weighty. It had no power. Today I get up at 5, not because business calls somewhere, but because sleep escapes me, as if it also despises me. In the kitchen, the dull ticking of the clock and a cold kettle, which I put on the stove just to hear at least some sound. My children are successful, busy, as they say. I rarely hear their voices, and every time the conversation sounds the same. "Dad, are you okay?" I don't have much time. In these words, I hear not concern, but a demand. Don't bother them. And I don't bother them. I've learned to be silent, to hide my resentment behind a smile that they don't even see, because the phone is enough to keep me at a distance. My grandchildren rarely come, and when they do, they look at their phones, grimace at my cough, and answer reluctantly. For them, I'm a burden, like an old wardrobe that it's a pity to throw away, but from which everyone turns away. In the store, I see the same faces as before, only now they look past me. I hold out my money, and the cashier takes it so quickly, as if she's afraid to touch my hand. At the market, I heard one woman whisper to another, "That's Klaus, remember? He used to run a business, and now look." And there was a hint of mischief mixed with contempt in her voice. She didn't know what I heard. I pretended to be examining apples. In the hospital, they listen to me like a statistic. The doctor glances at the chart, mumbles something about age and blood pressure, doesn't even look me in the face. For him, I'm no longer a person, but a process that's coming to an end. "You need to rest more," he said, brushing aside my words about the pain in my chest. I saw him hurry to the next patient, a younger, more interesting one. My life had narrowed down to a few rooms, an old bench by the gate, and walks down the street where I became invisible. People pass by, and only occasionally will someone say an indifferent, "Good afternoon," without stopping or looking me in the eye. I feel like I'm being pushed out, erased from this world. And what's worse, even my closest people have already done it. I was a support. I was a strength. I gave my years, my health, my nerves, and now I'm a shadow in my own home. They're uncomfortable around me. They're afraid of being reminded of old age, of the end. I'm a mirror they don't want to look into. Every little thing is like a nail in my skin. My grandson refused to help lift a bucket of water. "Grandpa, I'm busy." My daughter said, "You'd better be quiet. We'll figure it out ourselves." My neighbor pretended not to hear my greeting. I keep these moments as if someone would someday save them for me. I started writing them down. Dates, names, words. First, so as not to forget, because memory sometimes betrays me. But later I realized I record betrayals. I keep them in the lines of my diary, so that later, I don't know why, maybe to prove to myself, I'm not making it up. I'm not dreaming. It's true. I'm not needed. In the silence of the evening, I sit by the window and look at the street light burning at the crossroads. Its light brings me a memory. There, behind this light, people once waited for me. And now it shines only for the empty street, and the old man who feels something cracking inside him like an old board in the floor. This is a crack in me, and I know one day it will burst. When I was 20, the world seemed like a battle that could only be won with teeth and fists. My pockets were empty, my hands were calloused, and my heart was stubborn, not letting me lower my head. I decided then that I would get up. And I did. I remember the first warehouse, a cold room on the outskirts, smelling of dust and damp, where I spent the night among boxes, covering myself with an old blanket because I didn't even have money for a room. But in the morning, I would get up and negotiate, with suppliers, with clients, with people who didn't believe in me back then. And every deal, every folder of documents was a victory, a small stone in the foundation of my life. I saw others give up. How they drank, complained about fate, waited for mercy. But I didn't wait. I kept going, even when my body screamed with fatigue. I had no right to lose. I knew, if I broke down today, I would be gone tomorrow. And this stubbornness became my weapon. Later, I started a business, first small, then bigger. I had partners. I had enemies. I learned to keep my word and learned to punish those who lied. My name sounded like a guarantee. If Klaus said it, it will happen. People knew that I would not sell out or bend. This gave me strength. I remember my first office, bright, with a large window. The table where I was sitting seemed to me like a throne. That was when I first felt that my life had weight. People would appear at the door, asking for advice, money, work, and I would give. Not out of mercy, but because I saw myself in them. My children grew up in abundance. They had what I never had: new clothes, books, the opportunity to study. I worked for them, staying up all night, not resting all day. I wanted them to never know the hunger, the humiliation, the powerless years that I had to go through. And I was proud when they grew up, when they became educated, confident. I thought they would understand the price of it. I remember the losses too. Friends who couldn't stand the chase and broke down. Competitors who played dirty. I remember the nights when I drank more than I should to numb the pain. And yet, I held on. I got up the next morning and kept going, because my family was there, and I believed that their gratitude was the greatest reward. And I also remember the looks of respect. When I entered the hall, the conversations would quiet down. People would stand up. They would shake my hand firmly, with a smile that meant, "We're glad to see you." I was the one they were addressing. I was the one they were listening to. Now these memories ring like distant bells. I sit in my old house and dream of the days when my every action had meaning. And when I wake up, I am faced with silence, indifference, emptiness. All those years, efforts, victories, where did they go? Who remembers, except me? My children live their own lives. They enjoy what I gave them, but they do not see my sacrifice in it. For them, it is a given. They believe that it was meant to be, that success, prosperity, a roof over their heads are the norm, given to them by fate, not by their father's hands. They do not know how I stood in the cold, negotiating a last chance, how I denied myself in order to give them. I look at their faces now and see indifference, the same one I used to fear when I worked nights. I believed they would appreciate that in my old age I would not be alone. And now I understand. I was wrong. The contrast cuts me like a knife. Once I was a force, a wall behind which they hid from the world. And now they themselves have built a wall, only against me. I knock. I look for a crack, but instead I hear silence. And this silence is louder than any screams. Sometimes I open old photographs. In them, I, young, with a straight back, in a suit, with the same look that even stronger people than me looked away from. And I ask myself, was it me? Or was it a dream? Because what I see in the mirror now has nothing to do with that man. My memories are all that is left of me. They warm and bake at the same time. They make me feel like I lived, but they also remind me that no one else remembers. And the scariest thing is that I feel like even my children would prefer that I forget, because then it would be easier for them to live without the burden of my merits. But I will not forget. I keep every victory, every sacrifice, every drop of sweat and blood inside me, because that is what makes me who I am. And maybe that is what will one day become my weapon. My daily silence has become a trap. I am no longer just lonely. I am as if locked in a glass cage through the walls of which I see others. But they do not see me. And every meeting, every little thing, makes this cage stronger. I remember the evening when I called my son. I just wanted to ask if he would come over on the weekend. His voice on the receiver was dry. "Dad, I am busy. Sorry." "But maybe next Sunday?" I asked timidly. He sighed, and this sigh was heavier than any words. There was a tired, "Don't touch me" in it. "We will see," he said, and turned it off. I sat for a long time then with the phone in my hands, listening to the silence. An entry appeared in my diary. Martin, March 12th. Doesn't even have time for a word. A sigh that killed me more than the insult. My daughter, my pride, has always been able to speak beautifully. But now her words are like cold ice. When I asked for help with the documents, I needed to renew my insurance. She said, "Dad, you used to decide everything yourself, so you'll figure it out now." I can't do this now. I have a job. I wanted to remind her how many nights I spent on documents to pay for her education, but I was silent. And I wrote down, Anna, March 24th. She said, "You'll figure it out yourself." She forgot that I've been figuring it out all my life. For her. And my grandchildren. They don't see me as a person anymore. Only a shadow that gets in the way. Once I asked my grandson to help me carry a bucket of water. It was heavy. I could barely drag it. He didn't even look up from the phone. "Grandpa, I'm busy," I said, "just for a minute." He looked at me irritably, as if I had distracted him from the most important thing in his life, and said, "You can do it yourself. You have hands." I felt something snap in me. In my diary I wrote, Lucas, April 2nd. I have hands. And the doctor. Oh, I will never forget that day. I sat in line, holding the test results in my hands. My heart was beating unevenly. I felt pain. I waited for several hours until they finally called me. So what? He glanced at the papers without even raising his head. "It's age," he said. "Pressure. Take the pills." "But pain. It's different," I began to explain. He reluctantly looked up, and there was an impatient, "Shut up," in his eyes. "You have your fears, Mr. Klaus. That's normal. All old people are afraid. Next!" And they took me out like garbage. In the diary, Dr. Schmidt, April 18th, said, "All old people are afraid," refused to listen. Even in the store, I became a laughing stock. When I ran out of change, I took crumpled bills out of my pocket and counted them for a long time, my hands shaking. Behind me stood young boys, giggling. One whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "These old people should get out of line sooner." I stumbled as I handed over the change, and this time I wrote, Unknown, April 29th. Laughed at my trembling hands. My diary became a list of wounds. Each entry was a small death. And yet I couldn't help but write, because silence made it worse. I had to leave traces. It was as if I were preparing a testimony against this world. Over time, I began to understand these incidents are not random. This is not just indifference. This is a system in which the old man is no longer a person. I am a shadow that needs to be bypassed, removed, erased, and no one will feel the loss. In the evening, flipping through the pages of my diary, I saw these names, these dates, and something was gathering in me, squeezing into a ball. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but I knew. None of these events would remain without memory, because I remember everything. And memory is a power that is underestimated. There was nothing unusual about the weather that day. A gray sky, a light breeze playing with the paper packages on the sidewalk. I was carrying 2 packages from the store. Bread, milk, a couple of cans of soup, things that seem trivial to those who are well-fed and young. My steps were slower than they used to be, but I was used to my slowness. I was used to the fact that the world should adjust to me. I was wrong. At the intersection near the bus station, a group of young people were standing. Laughter, voices, the smell of coffee. I stopped to cross to the other side, and one of the packages caught something and tore. The contents spilled out onto the asphalt. The bread crawled, the can rolled and almost hit the curb. My heart sank, and my hands trembled with the simplicity. Whether from fatigue or shame, I couldn't tell. I bent down to pick up my things. "But he's old. Look how he's shaking," I heard a voice from above, which was no longer a voice, but a humiliation. Someone laughed louder. Another girl pulled out her phone and started filming. They laughed not quietly, but so that everyone could see, so that others could join in. I felt all eyes focus on me, and it wasn't a look of sympathy, but a crowd's interest in the spectacle. I asked, speaking clearly and quietly so that no one would be frightened by my weakness, "Help me, please." The words were lost in laughter. One man came up, waved his hand, and said, "No, do it yourself, old man. That's life." Another added, "Stereotypes are so funny. Old women who beg." And the laughter grew even louder. The little boy standing next to his mother opened his eyes wide and repeated the word old with the same contempt he had heard from the adult. I felt something change inside me. It wasn't a burst of tears. I had learned to hide them. It wasn't even the rage I had felt in my youth, fast and hot. It was something else, slow, cold, like water seeping under a door, and instead cooling everything in the house. My breathing became even. My hands, which had been shaking a moment before, lost that tremor and became heavier, like lead. The lead in my veins produced another thought. No, I will not be a victim anymore. The packages lay on the ground, and I stood looking at them, listening to the laughter. The reward for my request was only their amusement. I felt something dark and old awaken inside me. Not the savagery of revenge, but a sharp, naked clarity. I thought of those nights in the office, of the people who had looked at me with respect. I thought of how easily their gazes now bypassed me. I recalled all the entries in the diary, names, dates, words. Each line took on weight, as if it were being folded into a plan, into a map. The young girl filming on her phone made a gesture, as if calling her friends, and they moved a little, stepping aside to see better. The show continued. I felt shame, but not the kind that humiliates a person, but another. Shame for having once allowed myself to think that I could find understanding in them. Shame for having done everything for people who now laugh at my weakness. And in this shame, a coolness crept in. If they see weakness in me, I will teach them a lesson they will never forget. I gathered my things. I was helped only by a woman bent over a cart with a small child. She quietly lifted the can, handed me the package. "Hold on," she whispered. And her eyes were different, eyes that see a person. I nodded. I thanked her in the way one thanks those whose empathy has not yet been stolen. When I had moved a little further from the crowd, I stopped and put my hand on the wooden fence. My heart was beating, but now in a rhythm that was under control. Not a hot rush, but a cold, methodical readiness. I felt another figure growing inside me. Not my dying grandfather, but the same man who knew how to read people, make plans, command and demand. That man would not demand a shout. He would do everything silently, quietly, so that the consequences would fall like snow on a field. Evenly, everywhere, and unexpectedly. I didn't do anything right away that day. I went home empty-handed, but with a heart full of determination. At some point, sitting in the silence of my kitchen, I opened my diary and wrote a new line. Not pathos, not a cry, just a fact. In words that didn't sound like a plea. Never be a victim again. And when I put the cap back on my pen, I felt a strange lightness, like after a long pain, when a direction has finally been set. The silence of my home was no longer a void. It had become a springboard, and a plan was already forming in my head, cold, attentive, and ruthless. I stared into the darkness, and it answered me. After that day, the street and laughter became my starting point. I returned home, not empty-handed, but with clarity. In the silence of my room, I took out old contacts, a notebook that seemed to have long since gathered dust. Phone numbers, surnames, addresses. People we had once done business with. Some were still alive, some had disappeared, but the threads remained. I had not planned to hit or intimidate. My past had taught me that true power is manipulation. People fall not from a punch, but from the twist of the truth, from revealed secrets, from a crushed reputation. And I knew how to do it. I started with the children. Just a few calls, a few words in the right ears. I reminded their colleagues of old stories, cast a shadow of doubt. I knew everyone's weaknesses. Anna was afraid of losing the trust of her superiors, Martin, his clean reputation. I gave the world little hints, and they were already fighting among themselves, sensing that something was wrong. Grandchildren. Their addiction to money and status made everything easy. I cut off small financial streams that they didn't even know were coming from me. Suddenly, support disappeared, and they had to face difficulties for the first time. They were used to laughing at my weakness. Now their laughter turned to irritation and fear. And society? It was even easier there. I knew too much. I had documents, records, names. I presented information in a way that looked random. An article in the local newspaper here, a leak on the internet there. And everyone who had once turned their backs on me with contempt suddenly became the subject of gossip themselves. I sat in my old chair and listened to this symphony of chaos. Everything looked like a coincidence, like a series of accidents. But I knew I was in control of this game. And the man they tried to forget was finally reborn in me. I am no longer a victim. I am a director. No one applauded. No one thanked me. But I didn't expect that. There was no longer that indifferent laughter and condescending looks in the house. The children learned to be careful. They called more often. Their voices became softer, as if they were afraid that every word might turn against them. They understood that I saw more than they thought. The grandchildren suddenly discovered for themselves that old age does not mean helplessness. Respect flashed in their eyes, albeit mixed with fear. And even the neighbors began to nod at me on the street. no longer with indifference, but with that cautious respect that those who are better not to underestimate deserve. I didn't destroy. I just arranged the mirrors. Everyone saw themselves as they really were, and that hurt them more than any word or cry I had. I made a lesson out of their lives, cold, invisible, but inevitable. My revenge is not in blows, not in screams. It is in the silence that is no longer empty. In this silence my power resounds. I learned not to forgive, but not to destroy. I made them understand that even old age has the right to dignity. I made the last entry in my diary. Whoever erases the memory of the past deprives himself of the future. And I smiled, because now they saw me again.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.